Deep in the sun-scorched plains of South Texas, where the sky feels endless and the air carries the scent of dust, mesquite, and memory, sprawls a land unlike any other. It is a place where shadows stretch long over cracked earth, and where the horizon disappears into heat-hazed distance. This isn't a land defined by mountains or rivers, but by sheer ambition carved into the soil by generations of pioneers. Welcome to King Ranch, an American legend born not from crowns or conquests, but from cattle, courage, and an unrelenting belief in what could be built from nothing. Covering more than 825,000 acres, a territory so vast it eclipses the size of entire U.S. states like Rhode Island, King Ranch is not merely a ranch, it is a sovereign domain of sweat and story. But its enormity is just the surface. Beneath the scale lies a tapestry woven from triumphs and transformations that have reshaped not only the American cattle industry, but also the very identity of ranching as we know it. From creating the first-ever U.S.-developed beef cattle breed to producing a Triple Crown-winning racehorse and importing exotic Indian antelope that now roam wild across Texas, the legacy of King Ranch stretches far beyond its fences. Yet the real magic of this land lies not in its acreage, but in its endurance. For over 170 years, this empire has not only survived droughts, disease, and shifting markets, it has adapted, innovated, and led. It's a place where 19th-century ranching grit meets 21st-century agribusiness strategy, where traditions are honored even as technology paves the way forward. This is not just the story of a ranch, it is the saga of a dynasty. A living legend carved into the landscape and into the history books. A place where longhorns and quarter horses once thundered across the plains, where trains were built to chase profit through wild brushland, and where every sunrise still illuminates a frontier spirit undimmed by time. In this journey, we'll ride through dust storms and railroad ties, calving pens and breeding labs, cotton fields and citrus groves, all to uncover how one family's dream became a monument to American possibility. So cinch up your saddle, tighten your grip, and get ready to explore the most powerful cattle empire in the Americas, the one and only King Ranch. Origins: a captain's vision in the wilderness. The story of King Ranch begins not with cattle, nor even with land, but with a man and a river. Captain Richard King, a steamboat pilot by trade and a visionary by temperament, was not born into wealth or aristocracy. He was born into struggle, an Irish immigrant boy who ran away from home and taught himself the rules of the frontier. His earliest battles weren't on horseback, but on the deck of steamboats navigating the twisting, treacherous waters of the Rio Grande. Yet it was precisely this grit, this refusal to drift aimlessly through life, that would define the empire he would build. In 1853, Richard King stumbled upon a stretch of wild, unbroken land in South Texas, a place most men saw as a wasteland of cactus, thorns, and drought. To the untrained eye, it was inhospitable, even cursed. But to King, it was an untapped kingdom waiting for its crown. He purchased this raw terrain, land scorched by sun and hardship, and planted the first seed of what would become the greatest cattle ranch in the Western Hemisphere. His vision wasn't based on what the land was. It was based on what it could become. King started small. A few cattle, a few hands, a few rough-hewn shelters under the punishing sun. But from the very beginning, there was nothing ordinary about his ambition. He didn't come to ranch like the others. He came to conquer nature, bend it to his will, and rewrite the rules of the American Southwest. Where others saw desolation, King saw design. Where others saw thorns, he saw opportunity. And where others broke under hardship, King thrived. From the start, King understood something critical. Success in this brutal region wasn't just about strength, it was about systems. He didn't just raise cattle. He built infrastructure. He formed partnerships. He hired vaqueros, skilled Mexican cowboys who knew the land better than any gringo ever could, and treated them not as laborers but as brothers in arms. These men, known as the Caninos or King's Men, became the backbone of the operation, passing down knowledge, loyalty, and horsemanship from generation to generation. Their blood, sweat, and stories are embedded in the very soil of King Ranch. Yet the path to greatness was anything but smooth. The Civil War turned South Texas into a battleground. Droughts killed cattle by the thousands. Bandits prowled the borderlands. Markets collapsed and prices plunged. But King held fast. His steamboat mind, always charting a course through chaos, allowed him to navigate each storm with uncanny foresight. He expanded his holdings, reinvested his profits, and most of all, he believed in the land when others abandoned it. By the time of his death in 1885, Richard King had built more than a ranch. He had built a dynasty. His holdings stretched across the horizon. His cattle bore brands recognized across the continent. His methods had revolutionized ranching in the American Southwest. And though the empire would pass into other hands, his widow Henrietta and descendants like the Clayburghs and Clayburghs, his legacy would remain the bedrock of it all. Captain King didn't just purchase acreage. He carved out a vision with sweat, steel, and bone. He tamed a wilderness not with violence, but with vision. And from that first patch of parched scrubland, he raised not just cattle, but a kingdom. A land that would one day reshape the very idea of what a ranch could be. Engineering survival, water, disease, and the railroad. By the end of the 19th century, King Ranch had already transformed from a modest cattle operation into a behemoth of the American Southwest. But success in South Texas was never permanent. It had to be won, again and again, against a landscape that seemed designed to break men. The land was stubborn, the sun unrelenting, and the threats constantly evolving. As the empire grew, new enemies emerged, not soldiers or bandits, but drought, disease, and isolation. Water, or the lack thereof, was always the first battle. In this semi-arid wilderness, rains were as fickle as fortune. For months, even years, the skies withheld their blessings, and the earth cracked beneath the hooves of starving cattle. Then, without warning, torrential floods would erase entire herds in a single night. Ranchers called one particularly cruel period in the 1890s the Great Die-Up, a phrase as grim as the death toll it described. Cattle lay rotting in the dry riverbeds. The land moaned with thirst. But King Ranch did not wait for miracles. It engineered them. In 1899, Robert J. Clayburgh, King's son-in-law and a forward-thinking ranch manager, made a fateful decision. He ordered wells to be drilled deep into the parched earth, hoping to tap into underground aquifers no one else had dared reach. And then it happened. They struck an artesian spring, a buried river bursting forth with cool, clear salvation. It was a miracle of geology and grit. Within months, the ranch's landscape began to change. Windmills were erected every few miles, their spinning blades pumping life into reservoirs that fed both cattle and wildlife. Water became a permanent fixture, not a seasonal gamble. For the first time, King Ranch could withstand the fury of drought. Yet water was only half the war. The other enemy crept silently, draining the life from the herd with microscopic precision: ticks. Carriers of Texas cattle fever, these parasites could wipe out entire herds in weeks. The disease they spread made cattle unsellable, untouchable, and economically worthless. It was a slow-moving plague that strangled the industry. But once again, King Ranch innovated where others faltered. Clayburgh and his team designed massive cattle dipping vats, long concrete trenches filled with chemical solutions where cattle were forced to swim through and emerge tick-free. It was rudimentary, even dangerous, but it worked. These vats became the early blueprint for modern livestock disease control. Other ranchers began copying the method. In time, what started as a desperate experiment became a standard across the industry. King Ranch didn't just save its herds, it helped save South Texas ranching altogether. Still, survival meant little without access. Cattle were valuable, yes, but only if they could reach the markets where people paid for beef. In the 19th century, that meant miles of treacherous cattle drives through Indian Territory and bandit-infested badlands, or floating herds across rivers by steamboat, slow, costly, and perilous. The remoteness of King Ranch, once an asset, had become a chokehold. So the family made a decision that would reshape the region. In 1904, they helped fund and direct the construction of the St. Louis, Brownsville, and Mexico Railway, a bold project that slashed through the wild terrain and connected King Ranch to the rest of the nation. It wasn't just about profit, it was about freedom. The town of Kingsville rose along the new rail line, founded by the ranch itself as a logistical hub. Stockyards, cattle pens, warehouses, all sprang to life, pulsing with the energy of commerce. Where once cattle were herded hundreds of miles on foot, now they were loaded into boxcars and shipped east in hours. Beef prices soared. Ranching changed forever. This trifecta, water, health, and transport, was the foundation that elevated King Ranch from a frontier gamble into a global agricultural powerhouse. But it didn't happen by accident. It happened because a family of dreamers, engineers, and risk-takers refused to be limited by the land. They reshaped it, drilled beneath it, cured its sickness, and stitched it into the broader economic fabric of the country. In the unforgiving crucible of South Texas, King Ranch didn't just endure. It engineered its own survival, brick by brick, rail by rail, drop by precious drop of water. Rewriting genetics. The Santa Gertrudis Revolution. By the early 20th century, King Ranch had conquered water, disease, and distance. But they were still wrestling with nature itself. The cattle that grazed their pastures were survivors, yes, but they were not optimal. The harsh South Texas environment punished the weak and strained the strong. Heat, parasites, sparse forage, and vast distances between water sources created conditions few animals could truly thrive in. Traditional British cattle breeds fattened nicely in cooler, lusher climates, but here, under the merciless sun, they faltered. And the hardy Brahman cattle from India, though tough as leather, lacked the meat quality demanded by American markets. To most ranchers, this compromise was unavoidable. But not to King Ranch. What followed was one of the most ambitious and scientifically daring chapters in ranching history. The creation of an entirely new breed of cattle, one that would combine toughness with tenderness, resilience with revenue. It would be the first beef breed ever born on American soil, and it would change the global livestock industry forever. Under the leadership of Robert J. Clayburgh Jr., the grandson of Richard King, King Ranch began a program of selective crossbreeding unlike anything previously attempted. The idea was audacious. Take the heat-tolerant, disease-resistant Brahman cattle with their drooping ears and loose skin, and cross them with British Shorthorns, a breed prized for its meat quality and gentle temperament. The hope that somewhere in the genetic storm, a superior animal might emerge. This was not a one-generation experiment. It took decades, painstakingly recording bloodlines, observing performance, and culling underperformers. It meant tracking traits like heat resistance, parasite tolerance, calving ease, weight gain, fertility, and marbling. And it meant patience. Lots of it. But then came a breakthrough. A bull named Monkey, odd name, legendary legacy, proved to be the missing link. He sired generation after generation of calves that consistently showed the hybrid vigor the ranch had dreamed of. And in 1940, the Santa Gertrudis breed, named after the Santa Gertrudis land grant that formed part of the ranch's territory, was officially recognized as the first new beef breed developed in the United States. The Santa Gertrudis cattle were, in a word, revolutionary. With 3/8 Brahman and 5/8 Shorthorn blood, they struck a golden ratio that balanced hardiness with productivity. They were solid red, heat-tolerant, and highly adaptable. They gained weight efficiently in dry, rugged terrain. Bulls could reach weights of over 2,000 pounds, gaining more than 3.3 pounds per day in feedlots. And perhaps most impressively, the cows were fertile, maternal, and durable, often remaining productive for 15 years or more, far outlasting typical beef cows. This longevity was no small matter. It meant fewer replacement heifers, lower overhead, and more calves per cow over a lifetime. It meant profitability multiplied by time, the kind of long-view thinking that King Ranch had perfected across every part of its empire. And the results weren't just anecdotal. In trials conducted by Texas A&M, Santa Gertrudis steers outperformed cattle from dozens of other ranches. While the average steer returned a loss, Santa Gertrudis animals generated net profits of over $100 per head, thanks to their growth rates, feed conversion, and carcass quality. Their meat consistently graded USDA choice or better, proving that heat-tolerant cattle could, in fact, produce premium beef. Soon, Santa Gertrudis cattle weren't just dominating South Texas, they were spreading around the globe. Ranchers in Australia, South America, and Africa began importing the breed to stock their own herds. In environments where European cattle would have withered, the Gerts, as they were affectionately known, thrived. In a sense, King Ranch had not only created a new breed, they had exported resilience, wrapping Texan ingenuity in a red hide and sending it around the world. The Santa Gertrudis Revolution marked the moment when King Ranch stopped being just a ranch and became a genetic powerhouse. No longer content to adapt to nature, they were engineering animals that bent nature to their advantage. They weren't just surviving the land, they were sculpting life itself to thrive in it. It was legacy through biology, innovation through blood. And it proved, once again, that on King Ranch, the frontier wasn't something you crossed. It was something you built. American Red, the next generation of beef. Even after the monumental success of the Santa Gertrudis breed, King Ranch did not rest on the laurels of history. In the world of ranching, standing still is as good as moving backward. Climates shift, markets change, consumers evolve, and what was revolutionary yesterday can become average tomorrow. The leadership at King Ranch understood this. They had not built an empire by accepting good enough. They had built it by always asking, what's next? And the answer came in the form of a bold new vision, a next-generation breed that would inherit the hardiness of the past, but be engineered for the demands of the future. Thus was born the American Red, a composite cattle breed co-developed by King Ranch in partnership with the Santa Gertrudis Breeders International and the Red Angus Association of America. This wasn't a random crossing of convenience. It was a strategic pairing designed down to the gene. On one side stood the tried-and-true Santa Gertrudis lineage, celebrated for heat resistance, maternal longevity, and toughness under stress. On the other stood Red Angus, a breed renowned for fertility, feed efficiency, and beef marbling, the fine threads of intramuscular fat that make steaks juicy, tender, and flavorful. Combining these two bloodlines wasn't just crossbreeding, it was precision ranch engineering. The result? A red-hided cow that wasn't merely a hybrid, it was a super breed for the 21st century rancher. The American Red could withstand the blazing sun, resist parasites, stay fertile during drought, and still produce beef that commanded top dollar in modern markets. But how do we know it wasn't just hype? Because at King Ranch, every claim is backed by hard data. The ranch began tracking their American Red herds under real-world conditions, not controlled trials, but boots-on-the-ground ranch life, where the only thing predictable is unpredictability. What they found was astonishing. Pregnancy rates consistently above 90%, even in drought-stricken pastures where forage was sparse. What's more, these cattle ate 28% less hay and feed compared to traditional herds, an enormous cost advantage when feed prices skyrocket or water is scarce. And it didn't stop there. Once the calves entered the feedlot, where gains, conversions, and carcass grading determined profitability, the American Red cattle continued to impress. Over 80% of carcasses graded USDA Choice or Prime, proving that these animals didn't just survive, they excelled. They were built to thrive from pasture to plate. But perhaps the most overlooked metric of all was longevity, a quiet force multiplier in cattle profitability. On King Ranch, the average effective productive lifespan of an American Red cow was 8.4 years, far above industry average. Even more remarkably, 20% of the herd was composed of granny cows, over 10 years old and still raising calves. These weren't geriatric leftovers, they were veteran producers generating revenue year after year. Think about what that means. A cow that lasts 6 years may give you 5 calves. A cow that lasts 10, that's 8 to 9 calves, often more. According to internal projections, that adds up to nearly 60% more income over a cow's lifetime, without increasing the cost of acquisition. In economic terms, durability equals dominance. And none of this is accidental. It's the product of data-driven ranching, powered by King Ranch's custom-built EPD system, expected progeny differences, launched in the early 2000s. This internal genetics database allows ranchers to predict performance before an animal is even born. Traits like fertility, feed conversion, carcass value, and maternal behavior are tracked, weighted, and used to make informed breeding decisions. The result is not trial and error, it's calculated evolution. With American Red, King Ranch reaffirmed what had always been true of its legacy. They don't chase fads, they build the future. This wasn't just about better cattle. It was about redefining what better means. They weren't breeding animals for one environment, or one goal, or one season. They were creating a multi-decade solution for global ranching challenges. In a time when climate change, feed costs, and shifting consumer demands have ranchers scrambling for answers, King Ranch has already raised them, on 4 legs, red-hided, and ready to work. This is not just the next chapter in King Ranch history. It's a new standard for the cattle industry. Horsepower and heritage, from ranch to racetrack. If cattle were the lifeblood of King Ranch, then horses were its heartbeat. From the earliest days of the ranch's formation, when the thorny brush of South Texas had to be crossed not by machines but by muscle and instinct, horses were more than transportation. They were partners, warriors, and legends in the making. The cowboys of King Ranch, known as caninos, King's men, rode long before dawn and far past dusk, relying on their mounts not just for speed, but for survival, strategy, and strength. In the saddle, a cowboy's life could hang on the responsiveness of his horse. And King Ranch knew this better than anyone. From the outset, the ranch set out to breed its own cavalry, not for show, but for the brutal work of managing thousands of head of cattle across hundreds of thousands of acres. These horses needed more than speed. They needed stamina, intelligence, cow sense, sure-footedness, and courage. They had to cut, chase, pivot, and even defend. They had to be, quite simply, the best working horses in America. And King Ranch was determined to make that so. The turning point came in 1916, when Robert Clayburgh Sr., Richard King's son-in-law, purchased a young stallion whose name would echo across generations, Old Sorrel. A sorrel-colored colt with raw potential and a pedigree of power, Old Sorrel wasn't just a good horse. He was a foundation sire, the atom of a bloodline that would become legendary. Bred to the ranch's rugged Mustang Mares, descendants of Spanish war horses that had survived centuries in the wild, Old Sorrel produced offspring that were nothing short of phenomenal. These new horses had it all. They were fast enough to catch a steer, smart enough to anticipate its next move, and durable enough to work sunup to sundown. They weren't just tools, they were teammates, instinctively in sync with their riders in a dance that bordered on telepathy. Every quarter horse on King Ranch today can trace its lineage back to Old Sorrel. That's not a coincidence, that's design. Through rigorous selection, careful breeding, and endless hours of work in the saddle, the ranch established a dynasty of equine excellence that would shape the American horse industry forever. And in 1941, their efforts were officially enshrined when a King Ranch stallion named Wimpy was registered as AQHA Stud Book No. 1, the very first American Quarter Horse Association entry in history. It was a symbolic and practical triumph. King Ranch wasn't just participating in the quarter horse movement, they were founding it. But the story didn't stop at the ranch gates. King Ranch horses began to dominate in competitive events, particularly cutting, a sport where a horse and rider separate a single cow from the herd and keep it from returning. It's a pure test of agility, instinct, and partnership, and King Ranch horses excelled. In the 1970s, the bloodline reached new heights with Mr. San Pepe and his son Pepe San Badger, affectionately known as Little Pepe. These weren't just winners, they were icons. Mr. San Pepe won the NCHA Open World Championship twice and became the first horse to win both that title and the AQHA World Cutting Championship in the same year. His son, Little Pepe, picked up the torch and carried it higher, winning the NCHA Futurity, the NCHA Derby, and eventually being inducted into the NCHA Hall of Fame. Their combined earnings shattered records. Little Pepe alone sired offspring that would go on to earn over $26 million in cutting competitions, and nearly every modern cutting horse bloodline in the U.S. has a thread that leads back to King Ranch. But how did they do it? The formula was simple and sacred: strong bloodlines, great trainers, and real ranch work. Horses weren't just bred in stalls, they were proven in the pasture. Trainers like the legendary Buster Welch, a cowboy with the soul of a horse and the hands of an artist, took these animals and shaped them into champions, one cattle drive at a time. And yet, even this wasn't the ceiling. King Ranch had one more wild dream: to compete in the highest echelon of equestrian sport, thoroughbred racing. And once again, they succeeded. Assault and glory, conquering the Triple Crown. By the time King Ranch's quarter horses were dominating cutting competitions and reshaping Western equestrian standards, the ranch had already proven it could breed champions. But there was still one mountain left to climb, the Olympus of horse racing, where the finest thoroughbreds in the world galloped for immortality. A world away from the dusty cattle pens and mesquite trails of South Texas lay the bright lights of Churchill Downs, the hallowed grounds of Pimlico, and the deep track at Belmont Park. These were not places where ranch horses went. These were arenas for royalty, thoroughbred royalty. And yet, in the unlikeliest twist of all, King Ranch would not only enter that world, it would conquer it. In the early 1940s, King Ranch made a bold move. They had already begun crossing quarter horse lines with elite thoroughbred stock, blending ranch hardiness with racetrack finesse. But now they would go all in. They purchased proven stallions, imported top-quality mares, and began crafting a racing program with the same discipline they brought to cattle breeding. Their goal was not just to participate. It was to win, and win big. Then, in 1943, on a quiet stretch of King Ranch soil, a chestnut colt was born. His name was Assault, and his legend would soon gallop far beyond the fence lines of South Texas. At first glance, Assault didn't look like a champion. As a foal, he suffered a brutal accident, stepping on a surveyor's stake and badly damaging his right forefoot. Part of the hoof had to be surgically removed. From that day forward, he walked with an unmistakable limp. At a trot, he hobbled. He was ridiculed, dismissed, even within the ranch. No one could imagine this club-footed colt becoming anything more than a curiosity. But when Assault ran, something miraculous happened. The limp vanished. His stride smoothed. He glided over the track with fluidity and focus. It was as if, when called upon to sprint, his body remembered what it was born for. Pain disappeared. Purpose took over. Under the King Ranch silks, bright red with a white running W, the brand of a legend, Assault began an unprecedented run. In 1946, defying every doubt, he swept the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness Stakes, and the Belmont Stakes, becoming the 7th horse in American history to win the Triple Crown. To this day, he remains the only Texas-bred horse to ever accomplish the feat. He didn't just run with champions. He became one, overcoming physical adversity with sheer will. Nicknamed the Club-Footed Comet, Assault would go on to win 18 races and earn over $675,000, a staggering sum at the time. His victories weren't just about money or trophies. They were about grit, about proving that greatness doesn't always look perfect. It can limp. It can bleed. But when the gates open, it flies. Assault's success wasn't a fluke. It was the result of intentional breeding strategy. His sire, Bold Venture, was the winner of both the Kentucky Derby and Preakness Stakes in 1936. His dam, Igwell, was a King Ranch mare with deep American and European bloodlines. Together, they produced not just a racehorse, but a symbol. A Texas icon who could run with the best from Kentucky, New York, and California. And King Ranch didn't stop there. In 1950, just 4 years after Assault's triumph, another King Ranch horse, Middle Ground, won both the Kentucky Derby and the Belmont Stakes, nearly repeating the Triple Crown feat. These weren't lucky shots. King Ranch had, in less than a decade, built one of the most formidable thoroughbred programs in the nation, rivaling legacy stables that had existed for generations. But perhaps most impressive of all was the ranch's ability to succeed without losing its soul. The same hands that bred Santa Gertrudis cattle and worked quarter horses in the brush country were now raising racehorses that stunned the world. The Triple Crown Trophy, won by Assault, didn't sit in some Manhattan boardroom. It rests today in the main house at King Ranch, a reminder that Texas grit and world-class excellence can share the same saddle. In a sport where fortunes are easily lost chasing dreams, King Ranch stood apart. Their racing program wasn't just elegant, it was profitable. They bred, trained, and raced champions without compromising their values or operations. And they proved that a ranch born in hardship could go toe-to-toe with the East Coast elite. Assault's story isn't just about winning. It's about defying odds, redefining boundaries, and racing into legend. Like everything at King Ranch, it began with vision and ended in history. Sowing new seeds, from cotton to citrus. Though cattle and horses built the myth of King Ranch, it was the soil, tilled, irrigated, planted, and harvested, that would carry the empire into a new era of diversification. Long before agribusiness became a buzzword, The visionaries behind King Ranch understood a fundamental truth: a ranch that feeds its own land can feed the world. And with that insight, they looked beyond horns and hooves to the untapped potential sleeping beneath the topsoil. The roots of farming at King Ranch trace all the way back to Henrietta King, widow of Richard King and the matriarch who held the empire together during some of its most precarious decades. She wasn't merely a figurehead, she was a pioneer in her own right. During the Civil War, when traditional trade collapsed and cotton soared in value, Henrietta planted the ranch's first cotton fields and organized their transport across the border to Mexico. This wartime strategy not only supported the ranch financially but revealed the immense agricultural promise hiding beneath the wild Texas brush. Over the decades, that promise blossomed into something far greater. By the early 20th century, King Ranch began clearing brushland in South Texas to make way for row crops, chief among them cotton and grain sorghum, or milo. This wasn't some side project, it was a calculated, large-scale operation. They brought in irrigation systems, constructed one of the first cotton gins in the region, and began farming on a scale rarely seen outside the Mississippi Delta. South Texas, once considered too arid or rugged for consistent crops, was transformed into a patchwork of production under King Ranch's direction. Fast forward to today, and that legacy continues at massive scale. King Ranch currently cultivates more than 60,000 acres of farmland in Texas alone. Their cotton fields produce thousands of bales each year, much of it processed in a state-of-the-art cotton gin on their Laurelez division. The quality is such that there's a real chance that the shirt you're wearing, the sheets on your bed, or the dollar bills in your wallet contain fibers that sprouted from King Ranch soil. But cotton was only the beginning. In 2007, King Ranch planted its flag firmly in yet another fertile field, tuffgrass. Through its acquisition of Tuffgrass America, the ranch became Texas' leading producer of tuffgrass sod for homes, sports stadiums, golf courses, and municipalities. With 14 farms and 6 distribution hubs across the state, they now ship out milquillions of square feet of St. Augustine, Bermuda, and zoysia grass every year. On peak summer days, their Florida farm alone dispatches enough sod to cover 12 football fields, in a single shipment. And yes, even the grass carries the King Ranch DNA of quality, scale, and precision. Their turf division includes Mini Verde, an elite line of ultrafine grass bred specifically for putting greens used in professional golf courses. Whether it's cattle, cotton, or a blade of grass, King Ranch doesn't just participate, they dominate through innovation. But perhaps the most surprising and ambitious chapter in King Ranch's agricultural expansion lies far from the mesquite and dust of Texas. It's in the rich, black muck soils of South Florida, where another empire was quietly taking root.